Welcome to the Sencast. My name is Dale Pickles, Managing Director of B Squared and the host of the Sencast, the podcast for special educational needs and disability. Each week we talk about a different topic within the world of SEN to improve our knowledge, to provide support to professionals working in schools and to empower parents. And also I often learn lots too. In this episode, we discuss safeguarding and SEN, and we do cover some sensitive topics in this episode, so do please bear that in mind. And this week, my guest was Sara Alston, a SEN and safeguarding consultant and trainer. And Sara has 38 years experience as a teacher, school leader, SENCO, and now as an independent consultant. The Sencast is created and produced by us here at B Squared, and we help to show the small steps of progress pupils with SEND make, and we help schools to show progress through a wide range of abilities and a wide range of ages. We have a range of frameworks to suit students from birth all the way through to 25. And at 25, up to that point, we have our Steps for Life framework, which is assessing functional academic skills, employability skills, and life skills. And at the other end of the spectrum, we have our early steps for those in early years, but we also have our engagement steps for those children on the engagement model. And we can really build a profile of the student needs and the progress they are making. And to find out more about our products, visit the B School website or click on the meeting link in the show notes to book a meeting with me, and I can take you through our assessment software and how it can help you. Now, let's get on with that podcast. My guest in this week's episode is Sara Alston, a SEND and safeguarding consultant and trainer. Sara has 39 years experience as a teacher, school leader, SENCO, and now as an independent consultant. Sara is also the co-author of The Inclusive Classroom, A New Approach to Differentiation, and author of Working Effectively with Your TA. And she also writes for a variety of magazines. Welcome to the show, Sara.
Thank you very much for having me.
You are welcome. So, safeguarding is everyone's responsibility, but when it comes to people with SEND, things can get complicated, from communication barriers and misunderstood behaviours to gaps in training and also confidence. Schools can struggle to get it right.
Yes, and it's a very difficult area. We have, within Keeping Children Safe in Education, we have paragraph 202. Yes, I know it's sad, I'm on Safeguarding Geek time. I can tell you the paragraph number. But this is the paragraph that looks at, it's part of a group of paragraphs looking at groups of children with increased safeguarding vulnerabilities, and that includes children with SEND. And in that paragraph, we are given 5 bullet points, 5 areas of additional vulnerabilities. So that is the assumption that indicators of possible abuse, behaviour, mood, injury, relating to child's condition are seen as SEND, but without any further exploration. You have a behaviour, a mood, an injury, which if it was in a child who didn't have special needs, you would go safeguarding. But because the child has special needs, you assume whatever has happened is to do with that. Then you have, the next bullet point looks at the fact children with SEND are more prone to peer group isolation and bullying, including prejudice bullying, than other children. And we now have recent research, which said 1 in 4 pupils saying they're bullied at school, and that increased hugely for children with SEND. These children then are children with SEN and children with certain medical conditions are disproportionately impacted by bullying without necessarily showing the outward signs, because they can't understand, process what they experience as bullying or abuse.
Yep.
And so they internalise it. The whole issue of communication barriers in managing and reporting safeguarding concerns of abuse, neglect or exploitation, that we have a safeguarding system that particularly, but not exclusively for sexual abuse, depends on verbal disclosures by children. If you don't have the language, you don't have the communication skills, you don't have the understanding of what you need to communicate or how to communicate it, that is more difficult. And finally, there is an additional vulnerability around cognitive understanding. Keeping children safe in education talks particularly about being able to with the cognitive understanding the difference between fact and fiction, and particularly relates it to understanding of online content and the issues of children repeating content and behaviour that they've seen or experienced online without understanding the consequences. So we've got clear additional vulnerabilities, but what we've got there, is a real tip of the iceberg. We're saying in what's going on, how do we understand what's going on for these children, and how do we know when we've got a safeguarding concern and when we've got an SEN concern. We have to remember that just because a child has SEN does not mean they're not experiencing exploitation, abuse or neglect. Equally, where a child has a lot of safeguarding going on, that doesn't mean there is not also SEN.
Yeah.
And in a lot of schools, children tend to get on one pathway or the other, and we miss the whole child and their full needs.
Definitely. And there are children who may be challenging behaviours at home and at school, and may come in with bruises, and it's quite easy to go, oh, they've just kind of being difficult. But actually, that's what's happening? Is it, as you said, is that child's limited experience, limited knowledge and understanding around what's right, what's wrong, what's normal? Are you getting a real picture of what is happening?
And I think we need to remember behaviour is communication.
Yes.
And, where we have a child who is presenting challenging behaviours, is that one of the there are all sorts of reasons for that. But one of the things we have to bear in mind and constantly double check and review ourselves as professionals, that professional curiosity is about, where we say we're supporting with SEN, is there a safeguarding concern? That question, if this child did not have that SEND label, would we have a safeguarding concern? Would we see this behaviour as a communication and of abuse? If we so often you will have a child, for example, who is showing sexualised behaviour, and the number of times I have seen where you have a child who is masturbating, self-soothing in class, it is put as special needs. That is a sensory need. It may be a sensory need. It may be a communication of sexual abuse. It may be both.
Yep.
And, it's that key thing about that professional curiosity. Are we seeing the whole child, and are we open to thinking the unthinkable? And it feels much safer, much more comfortable, particularly with children with special needs, to assume that all the concerns are to do with that. And I have already said, and I will keep saying this, is that I really strongly feel that all SENCOs should be trained to DSL level. Even if they're not actively working as a DSL, they need that understanding, that deep understanding of safeguarding and the systems within safeguarding to support and protect those children. Because often they will be the person who is working with these children as the primary, because lead person with the school because of special needs. And if they do not have that safeguarding understanding, they may not be in the position to actually ask those professional questions and to have that respectful uncertainty. Okay, we've been told, we've got a sexualised behaviour. Is it this? Why is it this?
I like that, because not only getting the training, but maybe not being fully involved in the cases, but being in the meetings, get you to be able to listen to the behaviours they are discussing, and you might be going, oh, hang on, this sounds a little bit familiar. But also you can maybe you're going, well, I've seen this, I don't think it's anything,
But you have
other professionals who are trained who you can have that conversation
and
with.
it's almost into the area almost of group supervision.
Yeah.
And actually, one of the things, as a Senko, you don't necessarily get. I would actually really think Senko's, whole different issue. I think Senko should have supervision and support.
Yes.
But that we'll put that. But actually to have, put that one, on the board as a big notice. We think this should happen, but actually to have somewhere to discuss through cases, for somebody else to go, "Ooh, have you thought this?" Because often we are having to think the unthinkable, and I think one of the issues, and when we were talking before we started recording, we talked about the whole issue of communication with parents and families. As a Senko, you often work very closely with families, and actually, a lot of the time, you have a lot of compassion, empathy, close relationship with the families. And actually, there is the risk if you have a family who are trying to hide abuse, neglect, exploitation, or if you almost being groomed as a professional into not seeing it, because that is where the direction is going. Equally, we are often working with parents who are really struggling to support and look after and care for their children. And that may blind us to the risks and the needs of the child, and actually what is the experience of the child, particularly if they do not have the communication skills to tell us. As we've also got the whole issue of parents of children whose difficulties with managing their own emotions and communication means they were a threat to their parents.
Yeah.
And the whole issue of child-to-parent abuse. But what so there's parents managing their own needs. So often, as a Senko and as a DSL, so many of the parents of the children with special needs also had special needs.
Yeah.
And so it was supporting those. So it's understanding the parents' needs and signposting, but not allowing our compassion, our relationship with the parent, to block us from seeing that the welfare of the child is paramount. And I think there's also a whole side issue, which is one of the banes of the Senko's life, is when the parent reports the child acts completely differently at home.
Yes.
And why are we it's so easy to get either into judgmental of the parenting, but what we are less good at saying is, why is there a difference? What is it that difference is? And one of the issues we need to be aware of is the possibility that is in fact something that constitutes a safeguarding issue. And then we need to remember, so I'm going to just finish my point, is we need to remember when you have that list of children who may benefit from early help, that includes children with special needs with or without an EHCP.
Yes. So when we think about, there is this section in KICSI because children with SEND are more vulnerable.
Yep.
Both in school and at home.
And online.
So it's not just one place, it is everywhere. And
I think it's worth saying, the risks to children with SEN are the same as the risks to children without SEN. So from all the same people, adults,
I was about to get there. So generally, I don't know what the percentage is, but most abuse happens from someone And I think it's all forms of abuse.
Yeah.
So when we think about that, it could be the teacher, the TA, the parents, the grandparents, siblings, friends. It's the people who are already in that child's world are the most likely.
Yeah.
And I think it is, we've all been parents, or most of us have been parents. with our young children, robbing us of our sleep, we're not in the best place. But it's, for lots of parents, that's a short-term thing. But for some parents, children not sleeping, behaviour, things like that means that kind of lack of sleep goes on. It can be really challenging. And that also can happen in the school when you've got children you get frustrated with, and there are schools who've been in the media recently for rather horrible practices going on, being caught on CCTV. And I'm not saying any of this is excusable or understandable, but the risks are there, and that's the whole point. We have to be curious about this.
And I think it's remembering safeguarding is not the same as child protection.
No.
And so safeguarding is that support. And a lot of work with safeguarding is supporting before it gets to child protection. So actually, that understanding for parents, and that's why I mention early help, are providing support for families with children with SEN. You may have where it actually hits that protection threshold, Section 47, but a lot of it will be under Section 17 of the Children's Act, the child in need, the early help, where the family need the support because they're facing greater challenges.
Yes.
That's not a judgment on parenting.
No.
That's a judgment on what situation they are working with. And I think the other factor we need to remember with children with SCN, particularly children with significant disabilities, but not exclusively, is that in addition to the sheer day-to-day challenges of managing their lives, for that some of those parents are also going through effectively a period of mourning and grieving for the child they didn't have.
Yes.
Which can impact their patience, their tolerance, their skills to deal with the child they have got.
Yes.
And I think that is important to remember. And that doesn't mean that they are a bad parent, but it may mean they're in a parent with need of more support.
So, my daughter, she masks at school. She is a quiet little thing at school, which I cannot imagine. She is an absolute insane fun thing at home, and I absolutely love her. And that is, her unmasking at home is a positive, it's a reflection. We have so much fun. I'd rather she was how she's at home and be that confident elsewhere, but she's not. And sometimes that masking at home is about them being the real selves and lovely. Sometimes, and my daughter masks in school, she has to follow the rules. She doesn't like not following rules. She'll get in trouble and all that lot. But she kind of knows the rules are at home they're safe and they're flexible and it's all right. But she also knows that she's not going to get in trouble in the same way. I think when there's a young child who is just at home not following the rules, doing their own thing because they don't want to, because they don't have to,
or they can't.
I literally, I always say, well, choose not to, but it's not a choice.
No, we have to think the difference between a won't do and a can't do.
And when they're small, that's fine, because you're the bigger adult. I'm 6'3", so I'm generally going to always be bigger than my daughters. But both my daughters are taller than my wife. So if my daughter was in that destructive phase and had learned that if she keeps pushing it, she'll get her own way, at some point that starts becoming unsafe for the parents.
And we have to remember it can be just when it's unsafe for the parents, it's unsafe for the child.
And it can be unsafe for their siblings.
Yeah. So you have a lot of, you need, when you're looking at safeguarding children with special needs, you're looking, the welfare of the child is paramount.
Yep.
That has got to be our bottom line in all our safeguarding work. We also need to remember safeguarding of siblings, and we may well need to work with safeguarding of parents. But if we've got an issue where the child is a concern to the parent's safety, we have an issue which is a safeguarding concern for the child.
Yep.
And we need support. We need to be willing and able to support that. And that can be a tough argue with social care, because that is not what the thresholds are written for.
No.
And we, as professionals, as SENCOs, as DSLs, we need to be clear about what we see as risks And we need to be able to really use those threshold documents to talk about safeguarding the child. And one of the key things I think it's really important for the people working with children with SEN where there's safeguarding concerns is advocating for the child. What most of our colleagues in social care, in the police, in other agencies do not have the experience we have of children with special needs. And because we work with children with special needs, we very often forget what we know because it's our day-to-day. And one of our important roles is about advocating for that child. Advocating for that child on how they communicate. What is normal for that child? I am seeing something that I am seeing as a change in behaviour for this child. But if I got someone from another agency, their behaviour isn't what they expect of a child of that age. Therefore, to explain why it's a change. What is this child's the age, stage of development, and how is that different to their chronological age? Because the other agencies don't have the experience, they don't have our expertise. And so part of what we're saying is this is why we are concerned. And one of the things we need to be really clear is being what our concerns are and what our concerns are for that child and our description and our explanation of that child, because their child is different, and being clear that we're seeing additional vulnerabilities because of the special needs, and that's an absolute key on why we need the SENCO and the DSL working together. I'm going to get boring on that point, but I'm going to keep going on it.
We'll do a count.
You can do a count how many times I say it.
And that's interesting. Before we started recording, you touched on a child's understanding of what's going on, understanding of right or wrong, and the ability to communicate that.
And that's absolutely so. There's some real issues with communication. We have, as I said, Ed, the whole thing of dependent on disclosure. You can't make a disclosure verbally, if you don't have the language. And it's about children having the language, being taught the language as a whole can of worms, which I have found when I'm done. I go into schools and do safeguarding reviews, and one of the things that comes up often, particularly in secondary schools, is that the children with special needs, who need to go into interventions, go out of the low value, in inverted commas, lessons, PHSE, tutor time. And so they're not even in the room where they're being taught the language, never mind whether they're accessing it. So there's a whole point of, children, we were talking about children with assistive devices, actually having any language to describe abuse being offered to them at all, not being in the option. You were, I think, do you want to retell your story about going into the school? Because that was just such a brilliant bit of teaching, and I will then go on to communication.
Is this what I told you while we were having lunch?
Yeah.
So my colleague John...
No, the widget story.
Oh, the widget story. No, yes, that was... I'm a bloke, as we hopefully all know, and I grew up in a household where periods and things did not exist, even though I've got two older sisters and my mum. Not talked about, not discussed, completely hidden away. And I, like many blokes, learned a lot about life from my wife or his girlfriend. But I was at a school, and it was a secondary school, and it was really, really inclusive, and I was really impressed because every label, every door had a widget symbol beneath it, and it was everywhere. I loved it. Head teacher's office, there's a picture. And at the reception, there was a little Velcro sheet with all these different things on why do you need to talk to reception. And I was just going through, like, I'm late, I'm not feeling well. But the last one was period. And it was just like, yes, that's really kind of obvious. But at the same time, I'd never thought of it because it's not being in my world.
But for so many children with special needs, they're simply not given that language.
If I saw it, I went, I know what that means. Yeah. And I went, yes, you're going to ask for that. And I also liked the fact that anyone could just take that off and without having to say why I'm here. Yeah. It's a nice... but it was really interesting. And as you said afterwards, it's actually, is that communication available on Widget? Are those things to have these conversations? Can they be had?
Are they being taught? And then there's not only having the words, it's having the ability to communicate and knowing and issues. So not only the sort of mechanics of how and the words to communicate, but what to communicate. If you have a child who has difficulties with theory of mind, so if something's in their mind, they assume it's in somebody else's mind, they will assume that other people know what they're experiencing. And therefore, if they know and are not done anything about it, it's okay.
You also get into the world of what is normal.
And so often, I mean, there is a huge issue with what is normal for one child. It's, they assume that's how everybody else lives. They experience it, therefore everybody experiences it. It's one of the reasons schools so often will get disclosures of abuse on residentials, because children then talk and experience things like going to bed and discover that what happens in their house is not what happens in other people's house. The child...
Until you have that that point of comparison.
You don't know.
And you're like, I never liked it, but it's what happens.
It's what happens. And they assume assume it's what happens, everybody's. So, it's knowing... It's also having the relationships with people to communicate about abuse. And we need to be clear that it should not be the child's job to disclose to us. It should be our job to listen and to support. And any child who's dependent on others to support communication, it's more difficult. They can be misinterpreted and they can be silenced by the adults around them. I am going to do a recommendation for a resource, and I will give it to you to go on the inner pack. Is the Centre for Expertise on Child Sexual Abuse have a wonderful pack on communicating with children about sexual abuse. And if you don't get it, if you haven't seen it, download it. If you haven't been onto that, the Centre's resources, go. They are a absolute treasure chest.
I will make sure that's in the show notes. Now, one of the things you said earlier, which made me think, is kind of that age and stage, kind of, and there's their age, their developmental, and I think you also said in previous ones, their emotional stage, age. And one of the things is, often in primary schools, I think quite low on in primary schools, there's an NSPCC private pants. And
I'm going to say to people don't know pants resources, please go and look them up. But to remember, if you're dealing with children with literal understanding, where they say pants, to take the area covered by pants, you may want to extend it to talk about swimming costumes. Because actually the private areas are covered by a swimming costume, not just by your pants.
And yeah, it's one of those literal, yes, I completely get it. But it's also one of the things is that is generally covered and used when it makes sense for, or maybe when, maybe the top 20%, you're hitting that, starting to hit the issue, well, they get the pants resource out, we'll go for it in class. But that might be 4 years too early for some of these children. Actually, that should be used for some children in secondary.
And there are versions for secondary, there are versions to use with children with particular forms of special needs. It's, go and look and think about what is most appropriate for the child. Also, very few of us learn something if we're told it once.
Yes.
We need, and particularly for those with special needs, they will need to be told it again and again. I'm one of those children who will always, always be in my heart. Little boy I had in school, who he ADHD, previously looked after child, or he had a full Heinz 57th varieties set of needs. Absolute. We spent a lot of time. He produced a lot of very risky behaviour online because he was very, very vulnerable. Oh, and one of the, but if I sat with him in my office, and we did one of our sessions on online safety, he was your expert. He knew exactly what you should do to keep yourself safe, and he could tell you absolutely everything. On a not infrequent basis, he would do something online which he was dangerous and put himself and or others at risk. Because he knew intellectually, when he was in a particular setting, he knew exactly what to do. His ability to manage his impulsivity, his lack of understanding consequences. In the moment, when somebody said to him, "Oh, send us a picture of your willy," he couldn't manage. What we did get with him was we got to the point where, yes, this was an issue, but he could come into a trusted adult in school and say, I'm at the weekend, and then we go, okay, and we could unpack what he'd done and, hopefully mitigate the risk and the results of what he'd done. But, we have to remember that age and stage, children need to be taught repeatedly. They need to be taught in different settings. But particularly with online safety, there's an awful lot of education that needs to be done to support parents to support their children. Because actually, we can't teach it once.
No.
And as children's needs change, they develop, their maturity changes, their special needs change, they will need to learn that in different ways in different contexts. And that can be hard work. And it can feel very dull when you came and think, but I said this. But yes, we need to go on saying it. And what we need to do is remember that particularly when we're talking about online risk, for children who have trouble transferring information generalising information from one setting to another, we teach about online risk when we're in school to generalising that and applying it when they're at home, when they're on a laptop, when they're on a phone, when they're on a tablet, when they're on a gaming device. That requires a lot of cognitive understanding, and you need to make that really explicit. And we need to name things. We need to actually use words, not go it.
Yep. Now, we're getting into that bit of the exploitation and manipulation. And I think children with SEND are more prone to being manipulated. They're affected by peer pressure a lot more and being led.
Well, there's the whole thing of bullying, there's the whole thing of cognitive understanding of fact and fiction, that, they will, particularly some of the computer games, where they are seeing behaviours which would be inappropriate in school, inappropriate in the world in general, but they are seeing as appropriate. With the increased access, with faster broadband speeds, etc., to pornography online, so it is, it's one thing, okay, those are cartoon figures, this is not, but those are real figures, the different, not being, whole issue of generative AI, producing of images, that we've got, children who are at much greater, there's increased risk to children in general, and that is magnified for these children who are struggling with fact and fiction, that understanding of appropriate and inappropriate. And those words appropriate and inappropriate, we discussed being difficult, but actually it's really difficult to say that is an unacceptable behaviour. That is not something that both, and we need to remember that is unacceptable, both as a giver and a receiver.
Yes, and it's quite easy to use the phrase, well, everyone else is doing it. And it's easy to manipulate people.
And if you don't have the social understanding, you want to be liked. You want, you don't understand, you can't predict the consequences. That makes children, these are all the reasons that children are more, with SEN, are more vulnerable. And there's a whole issue of difficulties with understanding nuance, with literal thinking, with difficulty with empathy, or seeing more than one point of view. And it's not, one of the things we also need to really be aware of is the risks of radicalisation and involvement with political, religious, environmental and other causes and movements that lead to link with prevent. And I would again and again say its prevent strategy has had a bad press, and in many cases for good reason. But equally, the has been a lot of, it has not always been successful, it has not always been got right, but the work of the channel panels, working with those susceptible to radicalisation. And we need to remember the language is now susceptible to radicalisation. Those who with SEN may be vulnerable, but it is actually the additional factors that make them susceptible. And we have to be aware that is another area.
There's lots of areas.
It is a really complex area. This is why I wanted to come on and talk about it, because we are going to, I started by saying the pit in Kipsey is only a nice tip of the iceberg. We're not even getting to the water level.
No, and interesting. On our previous podcast, we talked about the importance of knowing the children, and this again, I think with the prevent training, it's about knowing your children. It's looking for the changes. So you have that borderline assessment, that baseline assessment. This is what they're like. They're now different. Okay, mum and dad says they're doing this. Okay, is that lining up? Where's it going wrong? What's the reason?
It's about knowing the child and being willing to think the unthinkable.
Yeah. And
whether it's prevent, whether it's a concern about physical abuse, whether it's a concern about emotional abuse, concern about sexual abuse. And, I'm going to I would like to dive in for a moment or two on the additional risks of neglect.
Yep.
You can see that one coming.
Yeah.
You can see me working down the list. And so much with the demands of care, but also neglect we need to be aware of is about persistent failure to meet communication needs, not providing the communication. Thinking about those issues of equipment issued to children, but that isn't being used to support them, or is no longer appropriate but still being used.
Yeah.
And that may be an organisational issue, and the parents may be saying, this is not appropriate, we need more support. And actually saying, is this organisational neglect? And it's worth looking for SENCOs and DSLs, looking at what the description of organisational abuse in adult safeguarding, and actually raising it for children's safeguarding.
So I think when most people think of neglect, we think of physical neglect, not being fed, not being clothed.
And there is all the issues, for children who need intimate care, as with, babies, is constant continence, devices not being used, change in children not being washed, but there's also the whole issues of communication, of equipment being used, misused, medication being used, misused. Parents are not engaging with professional advice. There's a whole issue there. About how physical interventions are being carried out. Use of behaviour modification, ensuring children have access to education, to play, to leisure, to social interaction, and whole issues about continuity of care. If your basis for identifying abuse is based often on changes in behaviour and presentation, if you don't have continuity of care, how do you identify change?
Yep.
because there is no, so thinking about that whole issue of neglect being wider and a whole can of worms of additional neglect issues for those children with special needs and particularly with disabilities.
Because you can also go into full-on kind of that emotional neglect.
Yes.
'Cause that's a kind of a borderline, because you're not being abusive. There is...
But emotional neglect, persistent, and that emotional neglect is abuse, and emotional abuse, and there's a whole issue of how people see their child, being aware of some of the language that we use as day-to-day for children with SEND, the whole thing of challenging behaviour,
Yep.
disorders, that language of they, othering. We need to remember, when we're talking about children with SEND, we're talking a huge range. They're not a monolithic group. Their needs are hugely different. And we need to be aware that we need to know the child. And I think there's also the whole issue of, I always struggle with this word, infantilisation of children with disabilities.
Yes.
They don't need to know about that, because that being anything to do with sex, because it's not going to be relevant. They're seen as eternally children, younger than they are.
But the problem with that is when the body is 18 and that mind is 5, 6, 7 years old, that's not how other people will see them. They can still be manipulated, exploited, and they need age or stage appropriate knowledge and understanding.
And it needs to be presented in an age and stage relevant approach. And it's not only how they're but also the sexual urges may well be there in a much, because that's where their age are even. And I know I had a number of issues in schools with children who needed intimate care, boys needing intimate care, getting erections during intimate care, and making staff feel very uncomfortable.
Yep.
And there's a whole concern there. We'll raise it as an issue and leave people to think on it.
But it's real, whether you take in their emotional age, their physical age, or their developmental kind of that stage, when they don't line up, it all gets very, very complicated.
And this is about this child, and this again goes back to the thing of one of our primary roles in many ways as schools is to be able to advocate for that child, because we have that knowledge of the child, and that child an individual. We also need to respect, with respectful uncertainty, the parents' expertise on their own child. Because actually, if they're saying we have a concern, why do they have a concern? They're saying they don't have a concern. Why don't they have a concern? Where do these stories match up? Because we may well be having to communicate about a child where they're not able to communicate with us, but equally we need to be really open to listening and hearing their communication in whatever form that may be. And remember, words are only a small, there's those lovely diagrams of how much of our communication is actual words and how much is body language and tone of voice. We need to be listening to these things in children. Their physical reactions, they will tell us a story, and we need to be prepared to hear that story, particularly for those who struggle with words or how to communicate with them.
And it might be, again, baseline understanding expectations is you might be meeting a child for the first time, and for with a good reason you go out to touch their shoulder and they pull away. And somebody, it's because they've got special needs. Is it?
It goes back to that whole thing. If the child did not have special needs, how would you regard their mood, injury, behaviour?
If they suddenly pull away and you're like, oh, that was why? And someone says, oh, they've got special needs. It's like, that's not an answer. That's a bit of useful information.
But it's not an answer. and we need so often that people say they have special needs, AIDS, and that's the end of it. And also the things where the special need doesn't match up with I remember a child who we had who was coming in with bruising, and Mum said they're very clumsy, and it actually took us sort of thinking, hang on, we're not seeing them as clumsy in school. Why are they clumsy and sustaining injury in one setting but not in the other? And investigation became very clear reasons why they were sustaining bruising in one place but not another.
But there are times where I think children learn to manipulate their parents, and they can learn that if they start hurting themselves, the parents will give them what they want.
Yeah.
And and again, every situation will be uniquely different, because there'll be one person who's listening to that going, no, we did that, but there was a reason. Another going, yeah, that's exactly what happened. There are so many variations of every story, but it is understanding just because they've learned how to manipulate them doesn't mean it's great for them. And also, that manipulation probably shouldn't be it's just loads of things you've got to unpick.
It doesn't mean they're not living with abuse. Just because, and you have to remember that they may have learnt that manipulation as an result of the abuse. And equally, there may be two parents or more or wider family members. So something they've learnt from one family member may actually be a result of abuse of another family member. And we have to be, it's that respectful uncertainty. It is that professional curiosity. What is the story here? Not just saying they have special needs, end of. But saying, and equally, I would always, I go back, another child I will always hold in my heart. Little girl arrived in secondary school before CPOMs are my concern, and the world of online recording, her safeguarding folders, there were, I think, 6 lever arch folders of safeguarding records. In all the support that had been put in for her safeguarding, they had completely missed that one of the reasons she was kicking off in every lesson in school was she had a reading age of about 6.5. She couldn't access any of the secondary school curriculum. But because everybody had been so focused on supporting her safeguarding, and every behaviour, every need had been put down to safeguarding, they'd missed that she had massive educational difficulties. And part of those were because her emotional needs meant it was so difficult for her to access learning, but there was also a significant cognitive difficulty, which had been completely missed because the focus had been, and the lead professional, the whole thing of in schools, the dangerous working in silos.
And just be clear, we're not saying that every child who hurts himself at home, all those sorts of things, is abuse or anything. And it always says, I sit there, I'm talking, going, it sounds like we're being really harsh on every parent. It's not. But every single person needs to be just curious that, what if? And even if your child comes home from school and you're going, well, why? You need to ask. We should all be protecting these children.
And it is protecting the welfare of the child is paramount, and we need to be clear. But, the same as there are lots of children out there who, thank goodness, are not experiencing any form of abuse, and that applies to children with SEN as well as to other children.
Yes.
And so we're certainly, and we are well aware that children, bruise themselves. I always go back to the health visit I had when my elder child first started walking, and I took him to see the health visitor when there was a decent health visitor service. That's a whole story for another day. And I said, he's covered in bruises. And she said, given his age, I'm not worried. She said, there are 2 things that worry me. What worries me is when I see a child at this age without any bruises. Because either the parent knows there are too many bruises and is trying to cover them, or they're not being given the opportunity to move properly. And I thought, yeah. But she said, children get bruised.
They do.
And, we need to be that reality check. One of the many, many challenges of being a DSL, and I was a DSL for many, many years, and now work, a lot of my work's in safeguarding, is they trying to balance the thinking the unthinkable and not becoming completely paranoid.
Yes.
But what we do need to do is, and that's one of the reasons why the working together of DSLs, of Senkos, of talking to your reality checking what you're seeing, what you're experiencing, is so important. And remembering the voice of all the staff involved. Actually often the people who will know these children really well are teaching assistants. Making sure they have a really respected voice in safeguarding, and they have the really robust training to actually be able to share concerns and know that is their right, responsibility and duty. Actually those open relationships with parents, so parents can come and say, I'm struggling, without that being a judgmental, so that we can actually support them when they're struggling, not when they hit crisis. That we're actually looking at the whole child, the whole family, because actually SEN, and particularly disability, doesn't just impact the child, it impacts the people around them.
And that's a nice bit to end it on, that bit where, and again, we've talked about a lot of coming into school and that abuse happening at home, but to end on that, actually we need to see the need for that support at home in a non-judgmental, in a supportive way, that actually, I think, you often see your children and they're stuck in your head, and when they're much shorter than you, you can pick them up and turn them around and carry them upstairs or whatever, it's fine. When they start getting closer to your height, that's not easy. And as those challenges come, as you maybe transition to secondary school, and that behaviour, what support is there? How do they deal with it? How do they manage that?
I would actually, one of the things that struck me with that, is the support for parents. I think of a parent who was, you can't necessarily say I'm 5'0" and not huge. And a parent who I worked with who had a child who was a wheelchair user and was still physically picking him up to put him in and out of a car as he hit 11 and was actually approaching her size, and having to say, you need to stop, not because you don't love your son, but because you are going to injure yourself and there will be no one else to care for him. And we were actually, with her, our protecting the child was protecting the mother. And we were almost protecting her from herself.
And also we talk about, earlier we mentioned about what is normal for a child, and if that's all they've known, that's normal.
She had not stopped. It wasn't until I said, look at the size of your son compared to you, because he hadn't grown overnight, he'd grown gradually, and she just got used to picking him up.
And I think it is that children may not know what normal is,
but so might the parents.
But so might the parents. So when you say, how do you describe your home life as normal, is if that parent's being maybe bitten and attacked by a 4-year-old, well, this is normal. When they're suddenly 10 and the same size, being bitten and attacked is a lot more severe. And we kind of want to, that's not going to be safe for the child.
And it's about,
or the parent.
To make things safe for the child. When you sit through a child protection conference, and I've done many, and you look at the number of interventions that appear to be support the parent, you need to make sure the child is not getting lost in the support for the parent. But so often we need to support the parents to support the child.
Yes.
And this is about, but what we have to do is not allow our compassion, our concern for the parent, our understanding, our empathy to blind us to the needs of the child. And this is that incredibly difficult balance of working in this area where SEN and safeguarding meet, because it pulls at your own emotions in many ways, which is why supervision for Senkos and DSLs is vital.
Definitely. And I'm going to end it there. It's a really good point to end it on. We've kind of summarised it again at the end, and it's a really hard job, and there is no. I kind of sometimes don't blame the government for writing just short things, because it would either be at one end 4 lines or a paragraph 202.
Paragraph 202.
Paragraph 202.
In keeping children safe in education, 24. Obviously, I don't know when we're broadcasting, so the paragraph may have changed.
But it'll be around there, or it could be something completely different.
It was 199 last in 23, because I'm in safeguarding geek mode.
But it's one of those things, you either write it as that one paragraph, or you turn it into its own 200-page document, which is so unwieldy, and you can't go, it's either or.
No, and it's really hard, but what it is about us listening to, respecting and understanding our own voices as professionals. And one of the things for schools, we have a knowledge of these children that other colleagues may not. We need to be clear and saying what our experience and our knowledge of this child is, so that people understand our concerns. Because, I've certainly worked with social workers and with police who, for example, have no idea how to talk to a child with communication difficulties. They do not understand what a non-visual disability is.
Yep.
They assume all children with special needs look like they have special needs. I don't know what that look means.
Yep.
We need to be the advocates. We need to, and we're saying understanding what is normal. For us, our expertise is normal. We don't remember we have it.
Yes. And one thing just to end on is, if a TA is concerned and a teacher says no, you do not dismiss it. They are both equal.
And please, if you have any concerns, safeguarding concern, please speak to your DSL. And remember, if you have online reporting systems, they're brilliant, they're amazing. They do not replicate or replace a conversation with your designated safeguarding lead, particularly where children with special needs are concerned.
And you may think one thing isn't enough, but you don't know how many other things have happened.
You only have one piece of the jigsaw puzzle.
Definitely. Thank you for coming on the show. I know, again, like we always, this could go on forever. And I thought we were going to talk about a different part of safeguarding and SEN, but it wasn't that. But that's a whole other conversation as well.
And maybe one we have another day.
Yes, where safeguarding is the excuse. So as always, you'll find Sarah's contact details in our show notes. You'll find a link to Sarah's books, and she's only going to give me that link that she mentions. You'll find that, as always, in the show notes, wherever you listen to the podcast or on the Sencast website. So thank you for listening. If you're listening through a platform which allows you to leave a review or give it a rating, please give it a little review or give it a 5-star rating and let others know what you think. And also, share it on social media. The Sencast is created and produced by us here at B Squared, and we help to show those small sets of progress pupils with SEND make. And we help schools to show progress for a wide range of abilities and ages. We have frameworks to suit students from birth all the way through to 25 with our Steps for Life framework that assesses functional academic skills, employability skills and life skills. And for our most complex learners working with the engagement model, we have our engagement steps. We also have frameworks for the Scottish curriculum and the Welsh curriculum. We've got you all covered. Visit the B Square website or click on the meeting link in the show notes to book a meeting with me to take you through our assessment software and how it can help you. So thank you for listening, and we'll be back next week with another episode of the Sencast. It's goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me. Thank you for having me.
You are very welcome. Bye, everyone.